Hello, it is a new day with a new illustration that is ready for watercolor. So I've already taped it off. It is the morning at the moment, so I'm a little bit sleepy still. I'm just gathering up the brushes I want to use. And today, well, to start with, I'm gonna do the base washes of this character here. I inked this all with one micron pen, the very well-worn pen that I've been using forever. This is the 0.25 millimeter. It gets classified as the 01, if you can make that out. I finally picked up a new set of microns now, so these have a slightly different body on them. It's the black and gold type, but they're the same ink. But yes, I did all of this with just that micron pen. I don't know if you heard that, but the cats were having a little play fight there, and they had to be assisted. Okay, so I'm painting on Saunders Waterford hot press. This is the natural white. I find the natural white is still pretty white. I'm going to bring you over to the palette for a moment while I'm setting up my mixes. And then probably once I start painting, I'll be a little bit more quiet and probably put a voiceover over the top, because I just want to enjoy painting. But right now I'm setting up some of the mixes for the like undertones and the initial wash that I want to put onto especially the dress. So this is Azo Green. It's a very yellow leaning green, or a green leaning yellow, depending on how you want to look at it. And I'm also going to set up some let's see, what do I want to use? Do I want to use that? Trying to decide if I want to use Prussian blue or Indian Throne. Gonna go with both. If you can't decide, use both. So these, because they're initial washes, I need to make them very, very watered down. This is still way too saturated. I'm going to be watering that down even further. This one. So although the dress is green, I want to have some colour variation in it when I'm putting down the undertones. tones. I want to set up some variation to start with that will then make the washes over the top a little bit more interesting. And I also want to use this opportunity to set up some variation that will tie into the background, because the background is going to be a new paint for me that's on my expansion palette, which is Twilight Purple by Holbein, because Holbein recently released a granulating range, and Twilight Purple separates out into pink, purple and yellow, and the yellow ends up mixing with the pink to create like a kind of apricot peachy colour that's really pretty. And it's made up of pigments that I don't currently have, which is one reason why I picked it up, because I can't make a colour like that. I do not have a granulating yellow, for example. You can pick up the yellow on its own, but I decided to go through the Twilight pink rather than picking up just the granulating yellow. Okie dokie. And to tie the dress to the background, I am bringing out a little bit of PV19 here, which is this colour here, which makes me realise I've got a set of primaries on my palette, kind of. Just ignore that that's actually green, technically, kind of. Water this down. Okay. It's always interesting trying to find methods of recording and sharing what I create, but doing it in a way that's secondary to my creative process, because I always try to prioritize the creating first and then recording and how I'm recording as a supportive element of that. The sharing doesn't come before the creating, basically. I am an artist before I am a content creator. And I find sometimes that I just really want to focus on the painting and enjoy painting and pretty much entirely as just a creative me and the art moment. And it's very easy for me to still be able to share doing that by having my camera up and recording, but without talking during it. But sometimes I do want to sit there and chat and almost have like a artists talking over coffee and sketching in a cafe kind of vibe going. So that's when recordings like the start of this video end up happening. And of course, because things change even within one illustration, you usually end up having a mixture of the two. Back to the illustration though, this is what the underpainting looked like once it was dry. So there's a few different reasons why I like doing this. One is to roughly show the different areas of colours I'm going to use on an illustration. So for example, to establish, right, okay, these areas are skin, these areas are this fabric, these areas are this fabric, and so on and so forth. It's also to help me establish where white is going to be. So you'll see that there's a little strip of white on the chest area, and I've left that in the underpainting as just the paper, and there's also some areas under the armpits as well. So the chest area and the armpits, the white that you can see there is the like underdress of the outfit, and those need to be maintained as white up until I'll be adding shadow to them. And that is because watercolor is a light to dark medium. You want to try to preserve your lights as much as possible while working in watercolor, because you cannot add white back without having to use an opaque medium. There are other methods for lightening watercolor, such as lifting, but typically with lifting you're not going to get back to the pure white of the paper, especially if you're using staining pigments. And when I am doing illustrations like this, I tend to use a lot more staining watercolors, because they are a lot more suitable to layering. And when I do illustrations like this, I like to do a lot of layering, and staining colors don't lift as easily, so I can apply lots and lots of layers, and it's not going to as easily reactivate and lift the layers underneath. Whereas if I'm using a lifting paint, such as say like most ultramarines, that's going to lift a lot more easily. The ultramarine that I like using on my main palette, this palette, is a slightly less lifting ultramarine, but the French ultramarine I like to use, which was in the granulation video I did recently with the lion portrait, that one is really easily lifting, so I have to be very careful with how many layers I'm using and how heavily I let my brush touch the paper and things like that. Okay, this is the paint that I was talking about earlier. So I added this to my expansion palette recently. This is Twilight Purple by Holbein, and it's part of their granulating range that they just released. So it's more of a special effect colour. It's made up of 3 pigments, which I showed on screen earlier, and it separates out into like a peachy orange, pink and purple. It's very granulating, so it's acting as a special effect paint, and which is why it's going on my expansion palette. Also, I added Ocean Blue by Holbein, which granulates out into blue and yellow, and that'll probably be in a future video, maybe Mermaid, we shall see. But I'm using it today in order to understand it more, because there's only so much I can learn from swatching. I like using swatching as a way of recording and referencing paint, so like as a database, but actually learning how the paint acts, I found it's much better to do things like colour mixing, but then also using it for the things I want to use it for. Actually using it in illustrations helps me see how it will act in illustrations. Through this, I was able to find out how it acts on hot press paper and the kind of textures it produces, because granulation acts different depending on if you're using hot press, cold press or rough paper. And now I know what kind of effects I can expect on hot press and how much I need to move the paint myself, because Holbein is a paint that doesn't move as much as other brands do. And I did notice that while I was painting this background, I did have to wiggle it around manually a little bit, but it wasn't an annoying thing. If you figure out what a paint needs, then you can adjust to it, if that makes sense. One thing I've started doing is I've started putting my painting tape in the back of my sketchbook, so you can't really see on the camera that easily, but this is one of the muddy pages from the sketchbook that fell in mud recently. I've started putting painting tape down and then writing a little bit about the painting that I've done. And then hopefully by the end, it'll be covered in tape and covered in a record of the paintings I've done this year. But this illustration is my first Draw This in Your Style challenge, and it's still open for people to join. If you're interested in checking it out, check out the pinned post on my Instagram profile. I've also got some blog posts up about the inking process for this illustration, and also about the start of the Draw This in Your Style challenge. If you're interested in checking out, the link to my blog is in the description as well. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Let me know what you've been up to creatively in the comments and what you thought of the Twilight Purple as well. And I will see you next time. Bye!